Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa with EdWeb, and I'm really excited about our presentation today. I'm joined by Joyce Whitby and Kathy Mickey, and we're going to be talking about the transformation and funding of pre-K-12 professional learning in the COVID era. And Larry Coco is on joining us today. He was talking about Jersey sustainable schools this morning. So, Larry, welcome. Great to see you here, along with many of our friends and colleagues, and those of you who are interested in this topic. We're really excited that EdWeb is hosting these Ed Focus Fridays now on a occasional basis to address issues that are of interest to the industry and also educators, things that have come up with the pandemic and the great funding that's now being provided by the federal government, and how can we all work together to take everything we've experienced and learned and try to make education better coming out of this. There's a link there that the EdWeb team has put in the chat where you can go to a web page and look at our past recordings. We've had some great presentations already for our Ed Focus Fridays, and that will also be a place we're going to post our upcoming ones as well. And this evolved from a conference, a virtual conference that EdWeb hosted in February called the Ed Focus Industry Summit. And we did 3 days of conversations with educators in different roles and also industry leaders on different topics. And we have that all documented in a report and also in podcasts. So there's a lot of really rich information there. And if you're interested in this topic, as most of us are, I would suggest that you go and check that out. All right, so here we are, Joyce, Kathy. I'm really, so this was triggered, Kathy, our presentation today, because Simba in 2020 updated your professional learning, actually used to be called the Professional Development Market. Now it's the Professional Learning Market Report for the first time in 8 years.
Yes. Want me to go ahead now?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit just about your role at Simba and that would be great.
I'm the managing editor of the education group at Simba, and I've been there for 20 years now. And we cover both K-12 and the higher education market from a business perspective in terms of the people who provide educational materials for use in schools and colleges. So it's both ed tech and traditional publishing. This report grew out of a lot of interest in the professional learning market, and I will say that for the most part, you will hear me, especially, probably refer to it as professional development and professional learning, only because we're still seeing those terms used interchangeably. But as I go through this, I want to talk just briefly about how we did this. The reports that we do, the data collection, the interview, we gather from various sources and from interviews, in this case with officials from state ed departments, school districts, schools, professional development, professional learning vendors, and advocacy groups. The focus of the report is on factors influencing change in the market and the challenges facing professional learning and educators, and the forces that are driving demand within that area. As an overview, the market we found was basically sales of about almost $5.6 billion in 2020, 2021, which was down. We found that had been a projection. But basically due to the fact that there were education budget declines in terms of state spending and thus down at the school level. The traditional drivers of professional learning have been fairly specific. Either there's a new academic program, introduction of educational technology. The mainstays of professional learning have been have been literacy and math. That is fairly continuous from year to year. It is always in high demand. The recent growth in professional learning market that had been occurring was disrupted somewhat by COVID-19, particularly in the beginning, in the spring of 2020, when just about everything came to a halt. However, there was a broad need that became obvious as the pandemic continued. And the main issue in that case was how to drive student learning effectively in a remote situation. People just weren't prepared for that to the degree that they needed to be. And it was a quick kind of overview or a quick need. The breakdown of funding sources for K-12 professional learning, the federal government generally plays the biggest role in this because of the various programs that they provide. Professional development is learning is generally a key part of the aid that comes down from the federal government. States spend about a quarter of what's spent on professional learning, and local districts add to that, as do individuals who go out on their own for individual teachers.
Kathy, that's really interesting, right? Because if you can go back to that just for a second, because the overall funding of education at the federal level is more around 8%, right? So I think I didn't realize that federal funding is such a larger percentage of the funding for professional learning.
The money that comes down from the federal government often has use. It may be targeted to support math, but the funding for it will support professional development, and it is used. That kind of funding is used in many cases for that.
Great.
Professional development / professional learning. We kind of look at these definitions for it and the way it's shaped up now. Ongoing job-embedded professional learning communities, which I'll get to that definition in a minute. Observation and feedback. I mean, I remember when I was in school, the principal coming in and observing teachers. That still remains, this constant observation and feedback by whomever it's done is a very important component. Mentoring, coaching has become increasingly a big component and necessity. Short-term learning opportunities such as workshop. This is kind of the shape of how it's delivered. There are workshops, seminars, webinars, books. All of these play a role one time or another. Formal long-term courses, if you go back to school, that may be at a university or college. The state may provide some kind of long-term training. District may. Outside groups and associations also provide offerings. The topics, traditionally, a new device, a specific district regulation, a new state policy, these are all things that generate need for professional learning. Among the changes, one of them, and this is basically from the report, but it's still going on, is the participation of administrators has increased. So providers are looking at more services and content for them. Vendors are working with districts, not just at the individual school level, so that there is more of an overview within the district of the needs and wants. In district development of professional learning is happening. The district is looking at its needs and developing ways to address those within the district itself. States also are becoming more involved at the state Department of Education level, specifically by setting specific educational goals and in some cases providing means for teachers and educators to participate. States are also offering digital hubs. Hoping this is where the glossary comes in. The way we defined and referred to professional learning communities is really they're people-oriented. This is the group of teachers or educators in a school, in a district, or wherever they get together. It can be a group of French teachers from various districts. It can be but it is people-focused in terms of learning. And the Learning Hub is more a collection of resources. And this is one of the ways states are getting involved, because a lot of that is happening now, not a lot, but it increasingly is happening at the state level, where they are making things available to educators. COVID crisis mode 2020. This report was started before COVID hit, and it carried on through into the summer before it was completed. So we did confront the beginning of this. The crisis mode, teachers and schools and parents, everybody went into a widespread fast move to remote learning. And any emphasis on professional learning shifted to facilitating educators in that move. And it also went from, while this has been happening already, it increased during the beginning of the crisis, certainly, from the concept of having professional learning courses that you would take that were more official, to bite-sized applications where a teacher needed to know, I need some help in figuring out how to do this particular lesson for these particular children. And most of it tied into remote instruction. Long-term support. This was something that was evolving with professional learning also out of COVID. How to deal with equity issues. These are ongoing, by the way, as states and school districts are continuing to deal with this. How to address social emotional needs, developing plans for the summer and fall. This was spring 2020, and this all resonates in spring 2021. Developing plans for the summer and fall amid uncertainty. We're apparently all going back to school in the fall, but remote is hovering there in the background, and certainly everybody's developing plans for the summer. How to meet the needs of students falling behind. That was an issue last year. It continues to be an issue this year. Anticipated funding problems. That was a big change for us. That was an issue last spring. It is not really so much an issue this spring, although I do see, and there's nothing particularly scientific or numerical in this, but I do see school boards paying attention to when they're dispersing the funds they're getting from the federal government. They're wary of spending it on things they will have to support, or they're concerned. I'm not saying they won't do it, but they're concerned about having to support certain things that they might be spending on now once the money runs out. Trends. These are trends that we saw last year, but several of them, I think, continue to be trends that will be going forward. And one is a philosophical change that has been happening over many years now, from top down, teachers are told what to do, to educator led. What are your questions? What are your concerns? What do you need? The form has moved to more flexible, personalized tools instead of big meetings, although some of that still happens. Coaching, learning communities, continuous, that all goes on and will continue to go on. It's much more personalized. Subject matter, the evergreen in this is foundational literacy and foundational math. STEM is there now increasingly, and social studies and how to handle various issues under that general title are emerging as potential areas, strong areas for guidance and how to deal with differing views. The other thing that's coming that it topically is becoming an issue, not an issue, but a subject of interest, are techniques in education, personalized, differentiated learning, project-based learning, maker spaces. These all reflect the changes in education, the needs of special education students and English language learners. Has been and will continue to be issues. Again, this comes out more from COVID, but it's still there. Social and emotional learning, the new focus on that, equity, behavior, topics related to race and roles of families. These are all coming to the fore. Technology use has increased. We've moved from needing to know in terms of professional learning. It's not so much how do you use this device, but how do you use technology to spur learning. And finally, I think what has emerged from the establishment of learning communities is that collaboration is more important than ever. And that moreover, the growth of these professional learning communities are increasing not only at the school level, but growing so that they become statewide. This is just to give you a kind of a breakdown of the competitive landscape among providers. There are tons of different ways to get professional learning. And the largest seem to be consultants and independent consultants and pure play professional development providers. But there are all kinds of, from instructional materials to nonprofits to higher education institutions that actually do provide professional learning. The outlook for fall of 2021 sort of resembles the outlook for fall 20. We'll be back in the classrooms, but you need to prepare to be flexible. And if anybody's still not comfortable with remote learning, it might help to get comfortable. That may resurface. There's a new demand for virtual instructors. Virtual schools took off in a big way, and if they're going to continue, they are going to need to have educators who are comfortable in that medium. Topical needs, I think SEL and health issues, accessibility, equity, learning loss, those are all going to continue. Differentiated instruction and personalized learning support. If you're at home, you've got kids at home, you've got kids in the classroom. Will there be different teachers? How is that going to work? But I think what's happened when kids went home is I suspect that we got into more of a mode of differentiated instruction and more personalized approaches, and that may fuel more of that now.
Yeah, and Kathy, Project Tomorrow, the Speak Up data shows that 17% of students did better or prefer to remain in a remote teaching environment. Yeah. A lot of districts are talking about how they can make that possible, and whether that's because they had a more personalized or differentiated experience, or that probably was some part of it, right? But so I think what your comment here about we should be prepared to, continue with this in some way on a permanent basis is going to happen.
Districts are going to have to face that, and it's not just 20% of my kids are in a virtual school, and we've set one up, or we've allowed a provider to provide the virtual school setting. But there definitely are kids. I mean, part of that is, as a family, you have to decide whether you're able to have your kid at home. I mean, if the child is happier in that environment and flourishes in learning, and some children do, that's great. But somebody's got to be there with them. I mean, so families have to figure that out as well as school districts. But I think there probably will be. And they also have to figure out how this fits in with the physical school. A district has to, I've heard where districts are not letting kids who went to virtual school participate in graduation or the prom, or, it's a different school. And so districts are going to have to figure out whether they want to be inclusive or exclusive in that sense. Yeah. Yeah. And just the last point on that is those of you who read the report know we were pretty down on funding opportunities coming out of 2020.
We were,
but,
yes.
We thought it was going to be pretty dismal. Everything we were hearing, but there's a recession looming, and it's all going downhill. But truth to tell, it has at least temporarily changed, turned around and gone in a different direction.
And we'll dive into that a little bit more in just a little while.
Joyce is
we will.
And that's the gist there. So
yeah, this is great. And so Kathy, your report really triggered a lot of conversation between you and I about these results. And appreciate that EdWeb was mentioned in there, and we weren't mentioned in the report 8 years ago. So that was really nice. And Joyce and I talk about the role of the industry in helping educators at this time a lot. So we thought that we would go on and talk a little bit about kind of what EdWeb is doing, which we always kind of say we kind of work a little bit on both sides of the aisles, which is providing the free professional learning for educators. But we've always done it by being funded by our partners and sponsors who are industry organizations. And so it really has for 10 years been an opportunity for them to host professional learning that is free, that is virtual, that is produced. It's not job embedded, but it is just in time. And last spring, all of our partners and sponsors pivoted with their topics in no time. If they were going to, talk about reading, now they were talking about reading in the remote classroom. And so the ability to do things, that are similar to how we're coming on in the moment and talking about what's current. There's an article that came out this week in Education Week that we can talk about, and we can do that just on the fly. And then Joyce, has been doing a lot of work at looking at the funding. So Joyce, we didn't give you a real intro yet today, but you are the founder of Innovations for Education, and you've been a consultant in education for a really long time, and you started in education as well as a teacher.
True. Yeah. And as we were talking about in our little pre-meeting, when I first started, there weren't a lot of jobs in the New York City metro area for teachers. So I ended up for about 10 years teaching educational technology at the graduate level through Long Island University. So that was really kind of the core of my experience was in professional learning, adult learning, andragogy. So that was interesting to bring into working in the market once I got into marketing and sales and everything else. But we'll get to that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly go through. I'm just amazed at how much some of our real world experience, Kathy, reflects everything that you've talked to. And there's so much here. I was making notes while you talked about yes. But, beginning in February at the EdFocus Summit that we held, one of the comments that was made was that one of the biggest wins of all this was that virtual professional learning works and is amazing. And things don't always move so quickly during in education. There's nothing like a COVID crisis to make things move faster. That's another thing people said. We've learned we can move faster than we have been moving up until this point. But and along with that comment of, because we've seen for 10 years how teachers who are self-directed and interested in improving their practice and getting ideas and sharing with their peers love coming to virtual webinars. They're not courses, they're not micro bits of information, but they are short in that they're an hour and you can do it anytime, anywhere. So I think that goes along a little bit with preferring things that are shorter term in, their learning. But the thing is that, seeing some of the administrators recognize the value of this and how successful it has been may help this move forward faster as we go and come out of the pandemic a little bit. And one of the things we're all seeing is that when you use all the tools and you're creative, that these virtual experiences can be very engaging and they can enable us, as we're experiencing now. We're going to be talking about your comments in the chat. I'm learning from Joyce and Kathy, so it's almost like a 3D learning experience that we're providing for everyone. And you can talk in the back of the room while we're talking, which you can't do in a live conference. So I always like that part. And as EdWeb, what we do is host professional learning webinars, and they are a great way to support educators and for industry partners to help their organization too. So we just have a lot of experience with that, and we do it's kind of creating a win-win scenario for educators and sponsors. And again, we hear comments of, wanting district administrators saying that they want industry partners to provide touch points that aren't always connected to sales. And they also want the professional learning support to be there along with the solutions. And Joyce, I know you're going to talk about that difference between what is it to provide support versus the additional professional learning. And these are things that the district administrators, are asking for. Kathy and Joyce and I were looking at this data before we went live, because when I looked at your slides, Kathy, and saw, the topics that you noted, were the drivers, and the things that, were needed because of COVID, we see that reflected. These are our top 25 webinars just since the beginning of this year. And you can see from the registration numbers that the level of interest in these topics by educators. And we did a little bit of analysis on topics over here. So you're seeing that the top topics are reading and literacy and virtual instruction. And we're seeing anti-racism and social justice, social emotional learning, motivation, trauma and stress. So those are the things that we're seeing, Kathy, in our real world experience. But I think that really reflects what you have noted in your report.
Yeah, reading just it will be there forever, I think.
Yeah, I was actually surprised there wasn't math in the top 25.
Yeah.
We do a lot of math. We do a lot. It does very well, but it just didn't rise up as much as these other.
It surprises me a lot, because math is the one thing that no parent can understand how their child is doing math. So there's like zero help at home.
Yeah,
I remember that.
And algebra is a great indicator of graduation rate, right? So if you're not passing algebra, your likelihood of not graduating it's directly proportional. So yeah, I'm surprised that math didn't pop up in those top 25 as well.
Yeah. So Kathy, your report came out in July of last year. And much of what we see, is reflected in this survey that we did in April. I think this comment here, we did a word cloud, which is kind of fun to see what words, pop out as the biggest ones, learn. But, I think this comment too, you were kind of ending a little bit on that note of collaboration, right? Which are collaboration, professional learning communities, hubs. But, one of the comments was, we are not isolated and our common concerns regarding student learning in light of the COVID pandemic. And it has been a great resource to find solutions to common problems shared by fellow educators. I think that says so clearly why we need to work together, that they are common problems, and then working together, we get to better solutions. So we have just some charts here on what we found by going to our EdWeb members. We do this every year so we can benchmark the results. It's remarkable how consistent they are. But one of the first questions we ask is what type of professional development activities help them improve the most. I mean, this is to our member audience, but they do rate webinars as first, and they've done that consistently for 4 years. But you can see on this scale then how they've prioritized other activities relative to webinars. And, Kathy, you had on your chart a listing of, what are some of the different ways in which professional learning is delivered, right? So I think this reflects a little bit, right? They can do courses, they can go to conferences and workshops, they can participate in online networks. There's PD provided by their school and district or provided, by vendors. So I think it's a little surprising to me that ranking what's provided by districts is so low relatively here. But I think that's why it's important that districts bring in some of these other outside sources and ways for their teachers to participate in professional learning that aren't all district driven.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I think what that reflects is that the district didn't design it.
Mm-hmm.
They may have brought in somebody, but that would then become that you would then check the professional provider instead of the district necessarily.
Yeah. And then we ask, why our members participate in professional learning, and I just love that their top reasons are for helping their students to learn about new practices and ideas and to improve their teaching. They rank lower the things relate to their personal career or keeping up with their credentials. So, and then we did add a question in here this year about to get support dealing with the challenges presented by COVID. And so, that's showing up on the scale here too. We asked what's important in a professional learning program. So, the content being current and relevant is by far, the most important, and also having this flexibility to participate on their own time, that a program is free. We provide a certificate that can count towards credit to their school or district or state. And I'm always interested that at least for our members, the idea of digital badges doesn't score very well on this, but I know that may be something that's going to change over time. I don't know, any thoughts on this? I think this does kind of reflect some of the trends that you've reported on in your report.
I wouldn't be surprised about badges, particularly if those badges can add up to some kind of credit that they get professionally or in a raise or something. That's one thing, but just to pin a badge on your chest and say I did this is not. I'm not surprised that it's down there.
Yeah, and I think where we give them a certificate for their state relicensure, it's still a certificate, that gets them that credential. Then we asked how EdWeb had helped this past year. So I think this is also a measure of how they needed help. So we added questions about getting support for social emotional issues and adapting to online learning, and then addressing issues of equity. So, we can see that those are now really important things that they're looking for in the kind of help that they need in their professional learning, which is, added to information and knowledge and things about, their field or pedagogy, or, they've always been looking to make the learning more engaging for their students, and getting support that's not available to them in other ways. I think, we kind of started EdWeb, over 10 years ago to help them use technology, and that's like the lowest score now. So I guess everybody's getting a little bit more comfortable with the technology.
Yeah. I think what you might want to ask them about is their exhaustion.
Oh.
And how they're going to deal with that in the fall.
Yeah. Hopefully get a little bit of a break this summer, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of summer school going on.
A lot of summer school.
Yeah. And then this chart here, it's hard to measure impact on students, but I think that the thing that this shows is how much educators share what they learn. So it's kind of, if you educate or you teach one teacher, that teacher is going to share it with their peers. And then that's going to be shared with the whole school environment. So you're not just helping the students in one classroom, you're ultimately helping the students in the whole school. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And so that's a little summary of what we've been doing and how our data, Kathy, reflects what you've got in your report. And then Joyce, I know you're going to take us into the funding a little bit and a little bit more about how some of that money can be used for professional learning.
Absolutely. And I just think that the data from both reports is really very telling, and it's very interesting about, where people are finding real value. And, once again, those were the EdWeb, obviously taking from already a biased pool, right? These are people who already
converted. They're the converted. Yeah.
But it's a great indicator, because this converted technology savvy group that's going to do webinars still not ranking digital badges up there. And so I think it's also because they don't know what to do with the digital badge. And one of the things, just as a freebie out there, is digital badges can typically get integrated into your LinkedIn. So just saying.
With our certificates, they print them.
And certificates, they print them, right?
They print them and they turn them in.
Yeah, and you turn them in. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of acknowledge the efforts and things that they've gone on through. So, Lisa had asked me to come on in and kind of put together like a little bow around with this data of what we now know about, some of the trends within professional development and professional learning. How does the funding support it? And I think that's because I was the squeaky wheel at a recent meeting.
You were.
In
a good way.
In a good way. We did an industry virtual fly-in to Washington, D.C. twice this year. One was to work with our legislators from members of Congress and the Senate to talk about the need for funding, and that was before everything had kind of signed in March. And then after that, we were talking with the members of the new and growing Department of Education, the new regime there. And that was after this funding had come into place. So that's where I was the squeaky wheel. And I'll tell you what I asked in just a moment. So first of all, for everybody's sake, just so we have a good kind of a common foundation, I'll just kind of review again things you may have already seen this in a number of different ways because it's out there. And I think I've seen a lot of presentations sharing the information, but just so we have the same common baseline. Since 2020, there have been 3 major rounds of funding for pandemic relief that touched education. And the first one in March 2020 was quite a bit. And I remember just sitting up and saying, holy cow, are those B's at the end of that funding? And it was just very encouraging. And it was designed along with the second one. So there was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act. And then there was Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, because CRRSA is so easy to say. But between the two of those funding in March and in December, respectively, the goal was to make up for any of the deficit of state aid that might be going to learning organizations, K-12 and higher ed, because the tax base has been so disrupted, right? And so keeping the lights on, making sure we could do some of that deep cleaning and social distancing, buy enough Purell for everybody, transportation, other types of pieces that needed to just keep the lights on and running in buildings, and even if we were doing it remotely. So that was very needed, and it was targeted, and a lot of it hasn't even been spent yet, to be truthful. So those first 2 rounds are still sitting there, and they are still options for people to be utilizing, in addition to the American Rescue Plan, which just got signed in now in March 2021, which took my amazement at the B in billions, and it just completely destroyed that. And we went to 1.9 trillion for the whole nation, and of course about 170 billion in itself for higher ed and K-12 combined. So it's more than double of what we had previously received. And what I really love about this is that it's not just to keep the lights on and keep things going, but it's really focused at accelerating this recovery. And the report, the funding and the language in the legislator talks a lot about learning loss. And what we learned at the EdWeb EdFocus conference in February from educators in the voice of the superintendent and voice of the educators sessions was, we're just tired of hearing the words learning loss. Like, just let's ditch that. Let's ditch COVID loss and everything else. And what I heard very loud and clear from those leaders at the time was, we are eager to open up our schools again, but we are in no way, shape, or form going back to the way it was. We're going to go back to the future because we've learned a lot of things along the way. And then this funding came in short time after that conference, and they really did focus in on that accelerated recovery for both academics and social emotional. And I really do want to point that out because first of all, my career over the past 35 years, this is the most money that we've seen, even surpassing the money we had in the late 90s for Net Day and Y2K and all that good stuff that went on. But I've never, ever seen funding that put social emotional learning, mental health on the same par with academics. And here it is. So really, really awesome. We can take a look at it and see the different pieces of it as it goes on through. And I won't belabor this because there's a lot of things that you can get elsewhere, but 20% to address learning loss, or shall we just say accelerate learning recovery. And then another 80% for any allowable use under ESSA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, IDEA for special needs, Carl D. Perkins, Technical Act for CTE, Career and Technical, and the Adult Education and Family Literacy. Anything that you can do under any of those acts, you can use this incredible amount of money to do. Wow, that's just like, putting the keys in the car and let's go, gas up the engine, we're ready to roll. And then they just kind of said, sure, and here's some other things to think about, right? And look again, and here is mental health services and supporting connections with public health departments, summer learning and supplemental after school programs. So really quite a lot of flexibility in this. I'm going to just now share that there's a little bit more, right? There was more beyond that, just 140 billion. There was another 3 billion in addition for special needs for IDEA. And there's another almost 3 billion for private schools through the governors. And there's an additional 7 billion that's being managed by the FCC for what they're calling E-rate, but it's really also kind of known as homework gap. This is additional funds to ensure accessibility with bandwidth, considerations, devices, and so forth. So those places that had not yet completely disseminated devices could do so under this funding. So there's a lot within here. You can see some of the, average amounts per student sometimes exceed what the district would have normally had. It was all disseminated by Title I kind of formula, but it wasn't relegated to only being Title I. Now, when Joyce was being the squeaky wheel, this is what I said. It's like, so that's all great. So we're meeting with the people from the U.S. Department of Ed, and I said, this is all great. We love all this funding. There's flexibility, things we can really do with rigor, with evidence-based materials and so forth. But can you point to the place in this legislation that talks about professional learning? And they were like, in seconds, I had my reply. They didn't even wait. They were all jumping to answer the question. They said, everything can be used for professional learning. And I was like, well, it doesn't call it out. It's not specifically written that this could be used for professional learning. And, Kathy had said something earlier that federal funding for professional development was the highest, right? That was the largest amount of money that we spend on professional development comes from our federal funding. Yes, it comes from those programs like these that are highlighted within here. 55.4% is what the Simba report had said, right, Kathy? And then another 26.3 from state or 12.6 from local levels. But this funding in here, this is what they said to me. They said, Joyce, it's any of this. It's Title I, it's Title IID, it's Title III, Title IV, any of those components of federal funds that you have been previously using as approved ways to provide professional development and pay for them, they are all available within this as well. So I said, well, that's great, but I'd love to see the Department of Ed kind of come on out and say that loud and clear, because if we in the industry talk about it, they'll say, okay, great. But if you said it, then we would really have a little bit more credence to it. So hopefully we'll be hearing them kind of echo that out a little bit more. And I think that, some of our partner organizations, the reasons why we did the virtual fly-in to DC was because of work done by CETA, the State Education Technology Director Association, COSIN, Council of School Networking, Consortium, sorry. And who else was there? ISTE and SIIA, right? So we had 4 different professional organizations that put together this virtual fly-in to the Department of Ed and to the Hill, so to speak. And so I think that it's through those organizations that we can get the word out that professional development should be prioritized as we spend this one-time windfall of money so that we can create a better on-ramp to whatever that future is going to hold for us. So that's what we don't know, right? We were talking about the unknowns and things like that. We need to prepare for all sorts of situations, for lots of different contingencies, and look at those silver linings that we had from before. So
Joyce, going back to Kathy's comment about, Kathy, you were talking about with the funding, one of the things that districts are doing is looking at how to spend the money, because it does have a timeline, right? So Joyce, what you're making me think about is investing in professional learning is just a great thing to do, right? Because you're training your staff, and that training will prepare them to be able to, teach, better for the long term.
And, there's that kind of that 800-pound gorilla in the room, is that we have been through collective trauma over this past 13, 14 months as a nation, as a world. And teachers are burnt out and tired. We talked about that, and needing a break. And there's a larger than normal number of educators who are finding it, an option to take early retirement or to exit the profession. And that's just, that's very normal. Like you're tired, you're stressed. Yeah, it's time to move on to something else. But I contend that if you provide, as the administration, if you provide professional development to your educators, to your staff in a real collaborative way, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, that you can buoy up those spirits, and you can help recovery from bottom up by helping the teachers go on in and really feel better, able to handle whatever the future might be able to happen, right? So it was really interesting in your EdWeb data on the top 25, most common or most popular webinars. 6 of them had to do with either trauma-informed practices or SEL. So like over a fifth had to do with that. We've never stopped to teach this stuff. And I have one woman that I work with who's an absolute expert on this area. And when she first gave me some of the initial trauma-informed practices, professional development, I just kind of shook my head and said, wow, where were you 30 years ago? Because I could have used this every day of my entire career. And I think that that's the type of professional development that helps to soothe the souls of the educators and help them be better and stronger to carry the load their students and the parents and the communities that they serve can deal with.
Teacher and educator and administrator wellness and self-care could come under that too, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just looking at the time, and I know, Lisa, you asked me, how can the industry help, since we have industry partners here? And I've been, as I said, I started in professional development. I started in adult learning theory and andragogy, and worked for many companies and so forth. And I'm going to be really blunt about it, and I'll just say to any of the industry partners that we have here, take a look at what you're providing. And if it's product training, what keys to hit, how to log in, how to run reports, that's support. That's not professional development. And you can contact me directly. We can have a conversation about it. If you disagree, I'm willing to take that conversation on. That's support. One-time training. Oh, tell me about your product. Do you have any professional development? Yes, we'll provide you with a free webinar. Or you'll get, even a trainer on site for 3 hours. That one-time training, we used to call it seagull training, because like a seagull, you would fly by, drop your load, and keep going.
Okay.
That one-time training, I still call it support. It's not professional development. It is definitely a necessary thing. We need to provide that type of product training for sure, but it's not professional learning. And so I'm pivoting even, Kathy, from that professional development to the professional learning language, because that's a mindset that industry partners who partner with school districts need to do the right thing and think about professional learning as an ongoing resource, helping to build collaborative and collective expertise.
The other thing with that is some of the new technology programs with artificial intelligence are, I don't want to say complicated, but there's an intricacy with them and how they should be used and what they're best for, and in terms of working with the students, that you need help in trying to implement these kind of tools. And that's not just support, but the company who is providing this has to talk about the philosophy and the principle behind the whole system.
Right on.
And selling it.
One of our people in the chat even just said training equals click here, and professional learning. Said, how do you teach with this once you know how to?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
That's the cue.
And so as an industry person, you say, oh gosh, how do we do that? My number 2 bullet there, engage educators who are using your solutions well. And ask them to share their best practices and success stories and strategies, peer to peer, right? Get them sharing. You don't have to invent it. You should write down notes as to what it is. And hopefully there's some, there was some vision as to why your solution is so wonderful, and so forth. And the premise behind it, that you have experts and researchers that can add to it. But it's that practitioner's just explanation of, this is why it worked for me, and my kids really liked it when we did it this way, and I had them engage in that way. That's the priceless stuff. And
that's always been true.
And creating the professional learning resources, the community is great, the hub is great, and together so very important. And by the way, going back to the funding part of it, you can charge for professional development, right? We just established the money is there if you can put the value with the price. So people will say, oh, well, I can't give that away for free. No, it's going to cost you money to pay expert trainers to come in and share their expertise and to develop the curriculum. Sure, that has a value to it, and you can charge accordingly so that can help. But I'll tell you, the biggest part about it from an industry standpoint is not you're going to make money from the professional development. No, you're going to cover your costs. What the professional learning is going to provide is what I call stickiness. And that is that when people are finally using this solution, whatever it might be, well, you're going to see annual recurring revenue. You're going to see expansion sales, and you're going to see reference selling within a region. And from a business standpoint, that keeps you in business. And that means the teachers can still keep using your product year after year. It's a win-win for everybody. So all of the things that we've been talking here are just ways to both do good and help our teachers and our students, and do well, keep your business running. It's not one or the other, it's both.
That the win-win is so great in this. And I think professional learning is an area where it's more truly applicable than other fields. And, we've been talking about the collaboration and sharing in here, but the platforms are fairly inexpensive now to create a community for your customers and your users and all of that. And you don't have to feel like it's your responsibility if you build that community to answer all the questions or provide all the training. If you provide a forum for them to do it with each other, and it just makes it richer. And they anyway, we've seen just examples of that where an educator will post a question and their peers answer. And but I don't know who said it, but that phrase that the smartest person in the room is the room. So if you create these professional learning rooms, the room itself will, and as a sponsor of the room, you kind of make sure people get answered and there's content and all of that. But it really eases your burden to support your audience.
Right. Absolutely. Well,
Well, this has been great. We're getting some great comments and love seeing our friends and colleagues in the chat as well. We have a few minutes, so let me go over and see if we have some specific audience questions here. All right, so let's see. Joyce, this would probably be for you. Does federal funding for PD include money with IDEA?
Yes.
So I think your answer to that is yes, right? From
Absolutely.
What you explained.
Yeah, there has always been within IDEA not only money for professional learning, but requirements along that line, right? So there's certain portions of, or there's certain roles within the special education process that people do have to continue to recertify it. A speech language pathologist is one example, right? That people, they need to continue to renew their licensure as they go on through. But yes, the ARP ESSER funding does include professional learning money under IDEA.
And the additional $3 billion you talked about there, for what's that in? You said there's an additional $3 billion.
It was just additional, like, so they had the 123 that went to K-12 for ESSER. And then there was these other pockets of money that were just available within the whole piece of it. So it's
it's a separate piece. Okay. It's a separate piece. Okay.
Above and beyond. So you could use 20% for, quote, learning loss and mental and social emotional, 80% under all of those different acts, and yet another $3 billion for IDEA, because our students with special needs had real challenges in being able to interact remotely, although for some populations it was an improvement and they worked better. So that's a whole other webinar.
Great. Rita, it's so great to see that you are here. And I have another question from Rita, which is really interesting. Kathy, maybe you know a little bit about this, but is there any breakdown of how much ed camps have played a role in the professional development or professional learning landscape?
Specifically in terms of data, that I've seen references to that. And in fact, I think, but not statistically.
Yeah.
In how big. It's an approach, as I understand it, for teachers. I'm not terribly knowledgeable about ed camps per se, but as I understand it, it creates the environment changes. It's not such a formalized affair.
Yeah, exactly. But that's another example, of teacher-driven, organic, kind of thing, which is the trend, definitely, where things are moving. Let's see. Another question here is, so teachers are at the same time teacher, tutor, instructor, expert. How can teachers achieve those skills in reality?
That's a good question. I mean, it's just, I guess, really practice and do and experience. And so some of the things that we tried over the past 13, 14 months didn't work. And you learn the most sometimes from the things that didn't work. But then along that line, you found things that did work, those little silver linings. So it's by trial by error and sharing to figure out so that you don't have to repeat somebody else's mistakes, but just kind of learning as you go, and things like ongoing touches of professional learning that are short, sweet bites that are digestible, that you can then continue to move on. Don't try and eat the whole pie at once.
Yeah.
Step.
So I know we're coming just up to the hour. There is one more interesting, question, which is, are there any real cutting edge models or, courses, that you see out there? I mean, Kathy, did something come to your attention in doing that report of what you would call a really cutting edge model or practice?
Not so much cutting edge as I think I think just the sheer getting away from the top down. I mean, I think that trend of having something like an ed camp that focuses on one particular thing in a different kind of environment, the ability of using technology for teachers to reach each other with this works, this is how I'm doing this, for these kinds of children, for this learning situation. Those are short, sweet, pertinent things that other teachers can try without a lot of formalized going procedures. And I think that ability to share, and because you can do it online in video or whatever, you can do it across counties and states and everything else. I mean, it can be widely spread easily.
Yeah, and we work with school districts where they'll create a community for their school or district and use EdWeb webinars for professional learning. It's all free, and their own resources as well, and integrate that two together. I would say predominantly in that model, although the collaboration is great and having it free online and all that is terrific, that it's generally been driven by like a district priority. Right. So they may define several topics that they really want the educators to do. And sometimes we work with them to not pick specific programs, but to allow teachers to choose within a topic what they want to watch within a topic. And anytime you give teachers choice, these programs are much, much more successful, and they watch more than what you've assigned because they find other things. But this week, a district PD director told me something I hadn't heard before at all, which was that she didn't want to assign it at all. She wants to give them access to the whole archive or calendar, and what she wanted was data on what they chose to watch, regardless of what they might think they need, and that data would be really valuable to her to find out what they're picking. I thought that was really innovative in thinking about it differently.
Yeah. The other thing that we had heard was that teachers would form these communities on their own without district supervision or influence, particularly. Like, I'm a third grade math teacher, and they would reach out to other third grade or fourth grade or second grade math teachers. And because you can do it online, you can kind of create a different kind of community and share things and ask questions and do it that way too.
Yeah. So actually, I think the answer to that is what the teachers are doing themselves are the most innovative and creative I think, versus,
this is my need.
And there's some amazingly innovative educators who are just doing incredible things out there. One of the things we want to do with EdWeb is help them spread that, right? Yeah. So thank you all. Thank you. I'm seeing so many wonderful friends and colleagues in the chat. Thank you all for coming. This has been great. We are doing this series, this Ed Focus Fridays, not every Friday, but we're keeping you posted on when we're doing one. We're going to do one on June 4th, and we're going to have some superintendents on talking about how they're spending the money. So I know everybody wants to know about that.
Good.
Yeah, so that will be good, and we'll continue them, maybe on a monthly basis going throughout the rest of the year, but we'll always post the recordings. We know everybody loves to come in person, but can't always do that. And Kathy, Joyce, I mean, this has just been so great. It's been fun to talk with you, preparing for it and during it, and it's been really valuable for me. As I say, 3D learning. I've learned from you, and I think the audience has learned as well.
Well, it's a really interesting point, Lisa, because the highest form of learning is teaching, right? And in preparing to do a webinar or a session for anyone, you raise your own level up some. So that should be another element that people should be including in their professional learning, kind of like how Google does a FedEx day for their employees. Go ahead, take a day off, but tomorrow you've got to come back and deliver something overnight, so go take a professional development jaunt and learn something new, but come back and teach it to the rest of your colleagues.
Yep. Well, there's a funny story related to that. Our first community was with librarians with Michelle Ludala. We wouldn't be here today if it were not for Michelle Ludala, library director in New Canaan High School. And she did the first couple of ones with us, and I thought to myself, how many of these is she really going to want to do? We'll be lucky if she does 2 more. She's done 110.
Wow.
And she says exactly that. And she does them because that's how she learns, is by figuring it out and teaching it. She's an incredible example of that. But yes, that's so true. And I'm thankful that so many teachers share that feeling, because then they come on in these different environments, and that's just been phenomenal to me, is how willing educators are to share what they know and to support their peers. It's the most collaborative industry, I think. I don't know if there's another industry where professionals collaborate and support each other as well as educators do.
Now let's take it on. It's ours. It's education.
Thank you all for coming today.
Thanks,
Happy
Lisa.
Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
CGIF.